This is the Other 23 Hours podcast. We're here to bring awareness to and reduce the stigma of addiction through an open dialogue about recovery. Join us this week and every week for new episodes and content.
Are we on?
Yes. Okay. Hi. Today's episode is coming courtesy of a lightning flash of inspiration to Clementine today.
Yes.
So what happened? Tell us about it.
So, of course, I was washing dishes and I started thinking about the role of fear. And specifically, like when you're afraid for someone and maybe you tell them, and I'm pretty sure everyone's had the experience of telling someone what they're afraid of and maybe not having it well received, especially if they're stressed or not doing well themselves.
Is this worry? Like worrying about someone?
I think that it can be that way. Yeah, I think it can be expressed as worry. Although I think worry is anxiety and not always fear-based.
Okay.
So, I mean, so it's a little bit different. But I would say, when you're personal experience, when you're sitting at home and you can say, I'm worried that something's going to happen. That's a worry, sure, okay. But the fear is that you have a fear that you will be alone and abandoned all of a sudden by losing the person that you love. And that's a deep, deep fear for many of us.
Yeah.
And so, the anxiety and the worry can come in because of that fear. But I think you can have them too, kind of just irrationally without fear, in a way. I think you can just be kind of a worrywart type of person.
Yeah, you have nervous energy.
Right, exactly.
Tightly wound.
Yeah. So my idea was to talk about it because so much of our relationships and the experience of active addiction and even recovery, there are a lot of points in which family and recovering peoples can feel fear. And so I wanted to talk about some of our experiences with that.
Yeah.
And some of our
funny. Case in
ideas.
point, right before we started recording, I had a friend of mine call who is in recovery. And there's a very triggering question. I just asked, how are you doing? Because I know he's been struggling lately because he told me. And I didn't mean it in the, hey, how are you doing, being a thinly veiled, are you sober question. It was just a legitimate, straight, hey, how are things going with you? Mm-hmm. What's going on in your life?
And family can do that too. They can be like, hey, how are you doing? And it can feel so intrusive and prying in a way. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. It coming from really anyone, it can be...
Right. Taken the wrong way.
Yeah.
It can be sensitive.
Or meant the wrong way. I mean, it's a sensitive kind of question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what? So that was a thing. But what did you feel like the fear was around it? Just that, he would feel like you're prying, or did you have? You didn't have any fear asking him that.
No. This was just coming from a place. People that was just an example of how people can use certain phrasing as coming from a place of worry or fear
right,
about how someone's doing,
right,
are you sober, is it safe to talk to you,
right,
pretty much, or engage with you.
Well, and that's a legitimate and common fear, because when you are trying to keep good company and you're not sure who's doing well and who's not, because lots of people are really great people, and if they fall off, it's not that they become bad people. It's just that they become a little bit more tricky to hang out with because they're bad influences at that point. Like you could be put in a not a good situation.
Yeah,
so,
compromising situation potentially.
And especially if you are on like probation or something, you don't want to be around people who are, doing drugs or alcohol or whatever because something could happen and
there's
would be
very real repercussions.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, so the fear has a legitimate root
basis. Yeah.
Right.
Well. Yeah. So I think that that's valid for like in seeing someone in person, but like talking on the phone that's
your belief, but why do you believe that?
I think it's a little unnecessary because you're literally talking to someone on the phone and they're not like if you're not seeing them,
right.
So it's like safe to talk to someone on the phone because there's a distance there. So there's like a separation.
I want to bring up, though, that sometimes talking to people on the phone can be triggering. And this is where I'm going to be wildly criticized because this is yet another, and I'll give other examples, what I might consider better examples, but other examples of the way that people put their fear on you. And so one of the ways is if they've had trauma in their past and they become triggered, they will often expect you to do something different to help them feel less triggered. But the fact is that the responsibility is on them to take care of themselves in whatever way they need to. If they need to get away or they need to call a friend, or, it's not always possible for the person who's right in front of them, triggering them, to stop. It might be something as simple as they click their teeth when they talk. I mean, it all sorts of things can be triggering. And we're not talking about being offensive. We're just talking about really basic things. One of the basic things can be if you are... like one of the things for me, in my experience, that I find very triggering and I have to like get a hold of myself is when I am in the company of someone who is sick, but they're not like dope sick or they're not like alcohol sick or whatever, drunk, but because they don't feel well, there's still the same energy and sense and like taking care of them and things. And it really gets me. It's very hard to be around. I have a hard time being around sick people now because I find it triggering. And, especially if they're friends that have had substance abuse issues in the past, I have an even harder time seeing them when they're sick. It's just really hard. So I have to be careful because I don't want to be mean to them and I don't want to make them feel, helpless. And yet I can't be the one to help them because I have to take care of myself and address my own fears and trauma at that point.
I think a lot of these triggers come from associations.
Yeah.
So, like, in your mind, it sounds like you associate that kind of cloying, take care of me energy with
well, not to mention
use.
lots of other things like getting really tired and just falling asleep or like looking bad or, all
There's
sorts of stuff.
There's a whole host of other triggers.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the point really is, I guess at this point, we'll just go ahead and kind of define fear. So for me, when I define fear, and we could look it up too, but for me, I believe that fear is an understanding that's made about something. And it can be, like you said, wait, what did you say?
I said a lot of things.
Oh, well, you said that it's like attached to something.
So I said that it is, you make a Connection,
It's
but
like an A word. We're not going to go back and listen to it. Anyway, but basically you connect an idea to another idea in a fearful energy, and forevermore they are rather linked.
yeah, it's like a correlation.
Right. I mean, and lots of these things happen before you know they are happening when you are very, very young, which is why we all of the therapists will talk about childhood trauma and how much of an effect it has in your future, because you start to make these correlations very young, and then you don't realize it, and they subconsciously come out.
Right. Well, that is definitely part of it. And then there's also other like life experiences that you have in adulthood that cause you to make those connections and correlations between certain triggering activities that you see or behaviors and like having issues with them.
So one thing I thought was really interesting, and I brought it up, and I want to talk about it before we talk about this other thing, is I was saying when I knew you in your active phase, you were very fearless.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And I found that fascinating, but I have my own interpretation of it. But do you want to talk about like what was actually happening, or how you interpreted your own understanding of that?
Well, yeah, so I think there's a couple things that kind of go into that. So first of all, I think that there is some kind of correlation between using certain chemicals and kind of being
it disrupts your fear centers or something.
Well, I mean, it might do something like that, but after a certain point, once you get to a certain point in addiction, for me anyways, it was kind of like there's a total, like, I didn't really care what the consequences of things were. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen to me is like, what, I could die? All right. This is pretty miserable as it is, so
come to that.
That's not really gonna... I mean, once I had met you, I'd already been doing heroin for like 6 or 7 years, so...
Yeah. That's a while.
That's a while. Yeah.
We hadn't even known each other that long yet.
We still haven't known each other that long.
Yeah, but we will. We will soon.
We will.
Yep.
We'll
get there. Yep.
So looking back on it now from actually being sober, this perspective is that I recognize that a lot of the behaviors that I exhibited and the ways that they kind of came out, and a lot of that kind of cloying, like, don't leave me energy came from a fearful place.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's stuff that I'm still dealing with now, but I think the ability to recognize it for what it is makes a big impact on how well I can deal with it. Because, you have to know what you're working on to be able to effectively work on something,
Yep.
So, there's a lot of, like, codependency things and abandonment fears that I have that I think are shared.
I have those too.
They're pretty common issues. I was just looking at an article that was about the correlation between trauma and addiction, and there's like huge, like you mentioned, something like 70 or 80% of childhood, like physical or sexual abuse or assault, stays with you. Like those formative experiences stay with you and shape the rest of your life. So a lot of fears, like you said, kind of start subconsciously, but they really manifest themselves in outward, conscious ways.
Reality,
Yeah. So, like, you make certain decisions that you might not be aware. Like, I made certain decisions that I was not aware were correlated to my fear of abandonment. That, I had plenty of bad relationships and, like...
Yeah.
made shitty decisions about who to spend time with, and like hanging out with crack dealers, driving around all summer. And I'm like, well, all right, at least someone cares enough about me to spend time with me. And it's like looking back on it, it's like, what the hell? What was I thinking?
Okay, but to be fair, because I always like to be fair.
Yeah, let's be fair.
Some really good people get caught up in these things. And I'm not willing to say that...
This is not a judgment on people's character.
Yeah.
So the decisions that people make are not... The decisions that people make in active addiction are not, I think, a reflection of poor moral compasses.
Aptitude.
Like, it's not... the things that people do in addiction does not reflect whether or not they're a good or bad person, because there's like so many alterations that are going on, and like you get into desperate situations and you do things that you would never do normally.
Right.
So this is not, addiction has been classified by the Surgeon General as a disease, so it's not a moral failing. It has nothing to do with morals. So there's plenty of good people that are like sweet, gentle, kind, caring people who
that you would want to spend time with. It's just that you don't probably want to spend time with them while they're selling or dealing crack. That's not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you're doing crack.
In general.
It's a great idea.
Nope. No,
but it seems like, it's funny because like it seemed like it at the time.
Right.
And I remember being in the middle of it, and it'd be like the middle of the day, and we've been up for 3 days just driving around from place to place, and we're just trying to find people to buy this. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, what am I, like, what a waste of time. There's so many other things I could be doing right now. But it wasn't enough for me to actually leave. It had to take it had to get to a certain point that was like way past, like I had to do this for I'd just go on runs for like weeks at a time, just out there. But it took weeks and weeks, and then just crashing one day and being like, you know what, nope, I've had enough of this. But it was always like, I've had enough of this for now.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily I've had enough of this forever.
Yeah.
So
I want to share, I think I've already shared with you, but not on this podcast, that I had the reaction to your fearlessness at the time this way. I didn't see it as like the drug taking effect or whatever. What I saw is that you were in what I would consider like a war zone, a desperate situation. And I think in those types of environments, mental, physical environments, if you had fear, it would make you weak. Like, you needed to not be fearful so that you could get through and do the work that you need to do. And I still believe that's true even now. You can't sit here and have fears about your future and about how you're going to do things, and like, because you're still in a space of healing, and you got to do whatever you got to do to get to where you got to go. And so I looked at it like, okay, this is fascinating. Like, it's almost like you can't have fear, so you just don't.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely, I think, an adaptability and like adaptability and like survival mode kind of thing that kicks in.
Yeah, right. Survival mode
at a certain point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you get people too, like I'm not one to not go to a restaurant or like because they serve alcohol.
Yeah.
Because to me that's kind of like, well, I'm not going to limit the places that I go just because I'm afraid of being triggered.
Right.
Now, with that being said, I don't live a lifestyle, like I don't go out to bars. I don't go to the club to go dancing. Like I'm going to be 31 and that's just not my thing. So it's kind of, I feel like for me it's just naturally kind of easier because it's already, built into my old man lifestyle. So
it might be
I
a
don't
little
really,
easier for you, but it sounds like you also have set some boundaries for yourself. Like if you think, I mean, what about a situation where you do think you would be like triggered or
well,
feel like
that's
some trauma around? I mean,
absolutely. That's another thing too. Is I don't go to the dope house and just like, hey, let me kick it with these guys.
Right.
Just for fun. I don't know. I don't do that because to me, like, I wasn't a big drinker, so that's not like a big thing for me. Mm-hmm. But, you know, you put a pile of heroin or coke in front of me, I might be a little triggered.
Yeah.
You know? So it's just, I think what it comes down to oftentimes, especially with triggers, is just self-awareness and knowing what your own limitations are. Because, like, my triggers are not going to be your triggers, are not going to be someone else's triggers. Yeah. And then yours aren't going to be the same as mine.
Oh, geez. We got an ambulance in the background.
So you just have to know.
Sorry, folks.
Know about yourself. Yeah,
that seems to be a theme here. And I want to say, like, okay, so we're gonna flip to the other side of the coin, which is if you're family, friends of, you start to get all of these fears about what this person is doing to themselves.
Yeah, am I going to see this person again?
Am I going to see this person again?
Am I going to get that phone call?
Is their future in jeopardy? Are they going to lose their job? I mean, like, if they have kids, are they going to, like, ruin their kids' lives? Like, I mean, it really gets out of control, you know? And then what I find is that people use that fear. They use it in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes they try to use it for good, like in a promoting type of way, like, hey, these are some valid fears, you should do this thing. But sometimes they use it as a weapon, like, you're making me fear all these things, why would you do that, you know? Like,
yeah, see, weaponized fear is hard. So I think that's it's a pretty terrible thing to do, and I think sometimes it's meant this way, but then other times it also comes from a place of desperation where family members or loved ones will say, why are you doing this to me? And it's like, it's not personal.
I've absolutely said that.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah.
But it's not, like, that's not the issue. It's not personal.
Right.
You're just collateral damage to what is happening.
Yeah. Right.
That the person is doing to them. Like, speaking from the perspective of an addict who has put other people through that situation.
And I will corroborate the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but it's tough because it feels very personal. It's like, why don't you love me enough to change?
Yeah.
Where that's really, like, that's not the right question to ask. Because that's not the issue.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty, like, I mean, for me personally, I had all the love in the world in my heart. And as deeply as I wanted to change, it wasn't.
It was hard.
Yeah, it's hard. It is hard.
It is hard.
It is hard.
That's why we're doing this podcast. Because this shit's hard.
Yeah.
This shit's hard.
Any help is good. So
I think what personal experience here, the first almost year that I was with you, you were active for most of the year.
Yeah.
And at first I could really keep my fears at bay. I could keep positive and I could, like, get us what I call back on schedule. I mean, we used to do a lot. We used to do meditation, journaling. We would go for walks. I mean, we had a lot of things,
of activities.
Right. We had a lot of activities that we've talked about in the podcast, but we'll talk about again because they're very good.
They're still relevant
strategies for getting back on track. And
and staying on track.
Once
you're
absolutely
there.
Yeah. But the second and third year, I had a hard time disconnecting myself from from my fears and being positive. And I really felt, I remember at one point I just felt hopeless. And I thought I would never get there. But I did. And then, I wasn't very helpful to you. And not like I needed to be, but what I feel like is, and this is the core of my message to many people, which is that it is not helpful to put your fears on someone who is already struggling. And I don't think it's helpful for me to, say, I'm afraid of all these things. You need to fix it. It's okay to be afraid of all these things.
Are they closed already?
I think they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks
Sorry.
like yeah.
We're
Guess
at
we'll edit
Starbucks.
that out.
We don't have to. Whatever. It's kind of cool. I like the weird
Real
stuff.
life stuff, man.
I like the squirrel in one of ours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Cat chasing the rabbit.
Yeah, the cat chasing a rabbit, and then
That
we
was
saw
nuts.
like something else. Yeah. Anyway. Anyways, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it became a lot harder for me to not put my fears on you, and it became a lot harder for people to not put their fears on me and my
Right, your involvement in the situation,
right.
and how that affected your well-being.
That was huge in the beginning, especially when the people
man.
around me did not understand the scope of our relationship and what was going on.
Yeah.
They would just, it was so wild. It's like you tell them one little tiny, it's like feeding a pool of fish where there's 100 fish and you got one little pellet. You can put the pellet in and they just go crazy. Like, I would feed one little piece of information, and all of a sudden, all the fears came up in the person I was talking to, and they would just go nuts. I mean, they'd just start spinning all these webs of story in their own mind, and then, feeding it to me.
Oftentimes, I think that it's really easy when you hear a certain amount of things to kind of cherry pick the one. You have a conversation with someone and you hear one piece of it and that's it. That's all you remember, and you kind of latch onto it. And that's when it is. I think oftentimes with the ideas behind addiction and how it affects people and what it does and what it can do, the people, especially if they haven't had or even have had direct experience with it, that can be such a traumatic experience that it just, it's...
It impacts
really,
them for a lifetime.
Well, it does. And then, so, all right, if you go to a restaurant and you eat, if you have never been to Chipotle and then you ate there and then you got, E. coli or salmonella and you got really sick, and then someone, your cousin or someone you love comes up to you and they're like, oh, hey, I just ate Chipotle. It was the greatest thing ever. You're going to be like, whoa, no, don't eat there. That's not safe. I ate there one time and I got so sick.
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, well, it's not, it is a thing that happened.
Yeah.
But just because it happened to you, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen to them.
Right.
That doesn't mean that, there wasn't, other factors involved in that.
Right.
So, it's not helpful to tell people about your specific experience. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. It's not helpful to put your fears based on a specific situation that happened or experience onto someone else who is in maybe a similar but different situation.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is also reminding me of something I read online. It was a series of texts back and forth, and it was between a girlfriend who was concerned for her boyfriend who was in active addiction, and a fellow who was in a recovery. I think he was either in a recovery program or he helped people get into a recovery program. I can't remember.
Yeah, it was just the Humans of Addiction guy, the guy who runs the page.
Well,
pretty sure.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't going to say who it was, but
well, whatever.
Now you outed him. Anyway.
We can edit it. Whatever.
No, I don't want to edit anymore. I just want to do it. But anyway, the point is that he got the guy in recovery got very intense about getting the boyfriend help, and this is what I call motivating fear. So, of course, he probably wasn't like directly fearful. There's just the understanding that this is very serious, and in trying to communicate the seriousness, a lot of people will use fear to communicate this. They'll try to engage the fears of the other person in order for them to take it more seriously. But I think when death is possible,
Yeah.
you absolutely should not say someone's going to die if you don't do this. Someone's going to die if you don't do this, because I think it creates a deer in headlights effect. I think all of a sudden you are so upset that someone might die that you don't know what to do, and you are kind of stricken by pain at that point potentially as well. And you just feel like crazy about getting whatever done. And the thing is that if you're the girlfriend of, speaking from experience, you can't make your fucking boyfriend, I'm not editing this out, you can't make him go anywhere. And you don't want to think about him dying. It's not that it's not possible. It's that should not be your motivation. Your motivation should be him getting healthy. Like, don't say, well, if you don't get so-and-so in a program, they're going to die. It's a possibility. You can say it once. Say it once, okay? Just be like, there's a possibility they will die. But put them towards the positive, because that's going to help them motivate themselves and the other person. This person is going to be so much better when they get some help. And when you are allowed to, have a healthy and normal relationship, and when, when you look back on this and it's, something you can talk about instead of something that every time you try to bring up, he doesn't want to talk about it, and you don't ever get to, tell friends because they don't understand. And, there's so much around this.
Yeah.
And I thoroughly dislike that people use... That's a nice little car.
It's a loud little car.
It is. People use this fear motivation tactic, especially, I think they do it in the program sometimes, and I'm just appalled, honestly.
Yeah.
Right.
So weaponized fear, again, still is not good.
All right, last thoughts. What do you got?
Last thoughts. So I think being aware of your own fears is really important, and how they can affect your decision making. And that's something that comes over time and doing work with yourself, on yourself, or with a therapist, or other professional who can help you. But recognizing your own fears and how they can affect and impact your decisions is really important. And also not living coming from a place of fear and avoidance, but, rational safety is important.
My last thoughts are, and those are really good thoughts, by the way.
Oh, thanks. What are yours?
My last thoughts are, I would really love to see people address their fears more proactively. And by proactively, maybe I mean consciously. Like, get to know your fears. Get to know what's making you say the things that you say. Like, dissect your conversations a little bit and see, like, how many of the things that you're talking about come from a place of, like, I don't know if I'm going to feel comfortable. That's a fear of discomfort.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to get to see this person again, or I don't know if I might make them angry, or, like, those are little tiny fear elements, and they're manipulating you in the background, I'm not saying that you can get rid of them. I'm just saying that if, like you said, once you're conscious of them, you can get to know them, and then you see them, and that's mainly the way you can address them in the future, is to get to know. Thanks for listening.
The other 23 hours is used for entertainment, informational, and educational purposes only. We are not medical professionals. None of this information should be used to treat or diagnose any illnesses. We are not legal experts and do not offer legal advice. Please consult your local physician or lawyer for your own unique situation.
What do they do?
They send me unnecessary emails.
You poor thing.
Oh,
you must be the only one.
I read that situation all right.